What are native African religions? This video will cover native African religions, so not Christianity and Islam, but that's not an easy thing to do. So this video is going to be pretty complicated. I'll explain why it's hard to define African religions. I'll give you some common themes in the religions in Africa, and I'll also share with you some unique features for some of the religions in Africa. Let's get started. By native, we mean the religions that were in Africa, not brought to Africa. Today in Africa, about 40% of people are Christian and about 40% of people are Muslim. And for about 7 to 10% of them, they're practicing a religion that was from Africa, native to Africa, indigenous to Africa. And that's what this video is going to be about. But that's not an easy thing to do because Africa is a huge continent. And today there's about 50 countries. The different countries in Africa have different beliefs, they have different ethnicities, they have different languages, different histories, different cosmologies, different religions. So it's really difficult to define African religions since there are so many of them. And another aspect is that in Africa, the way to see religion and religious beliefs and thoughts about the supernatural is interwoven with culture and ethnicity and society. Nonetheless, there are some things that are commonly held for most of the religions in Africa, so I'll talk to you about some commonalities, but I also want to help explain how diverse the religious views are in Africa. On the screen here, you have not even 1/4 of the people, ethnic groups, cultures, societies, religious groups that are existing in Africa today. Each with its own history, its own religious beliefs of cosmology. Some of these are monotheistic, some of these are polytheistic, some of these are animistic and monotheistic. How do you take all of these different ethnic groups with their own beliefs and values and practices and then group them together to call them African religions? It's really unfair to do that. So what we're going to do for the rest of this video is just pick a few and then pull out some details about that specific religious view. Let's start with the Dinka. We'll work our way down. The Dinka have a very interesting story about how when God used to be connected to the earth in a much more frequently accessible way, God in heaven sent down a rope, and that rope connected all the way to earth. And whenever people wanted to talk directly to God for advice, they could just climb up the rope, go to heaven, and speak to God. But the Dinka explained that there was a woman who would be smashing yams to make food for everybody, and it was so loud that God pulled up the rope and he went a little bit higher into the heavens. And so now it's even more difficult for people to actually communicate with God. Moving on to the Dogon, there is a very clear social structure for how the people are organized. For example, the oldest male in the generation of the oldest generation is called the Jinabana, and that is how all of society is organized. It's through this Jina. The person who serves as the oldest male has a special place where he lives. He also gets special powers over the land, and he serves as the Hogan of those people, which is the priest. He helps make decisions for how people should behave. Above all of social society, which is under the Jinabana, is Amma. This is the supreme leader of everything that exists. Think of it as the highest supernatural being. So this is the Lord over everything. But he has sons. Sons of Amma are called Nomo, and there are several of them. They are representations of different kinds of personalities. There's this one which represents earth and fertilization. There's this one which represents fallen man. So in these people's lives, the Dogon, religion and culture is very well organized and structured in some such way. The Mbuti are very important for Africa. They spread through the middle of the north and the south, and they are a part of the stretch of Africa that has really held on to their native views. They are hunters and archers and gatherers. They have a very special ceremony before they start hunting. They have a view of God who's called Tore, and they believe that breath is what gives living things life. So when you die, what happens is that the breath, which has a name, leaves you. They are animistic. They believe that both inanimate objects and animate objects have spirits. And when you die, that spirit exits the body and could become one with God, could become one with the forest, or can go somewhere else. They believe, though, that the soul or spirit is eternal. It never disappears forever. The Mbole people, like most religions or cultures in Africa, make masks. But what's special about this group of people is that their masks are very rare and that they're only used during very specific ceremonies, like at funerals or circumcisions. I just realized that I put a U in here and it's been on the screen the entire time, so I apologize about that. This is the correct spelling. And these people, the Yoruba, are very interesting. They have a supreme leader, one God. So you could say that they're monotheistic. But just like in Christianity, there's one God that transforms himself into many different things, like in the Trinity. These people in Africa believe something very similar. There is one God who is so powerful, and people will not fully comprehend the power and the ability. So he's created avatars, so to speak, and they're called the Orisha. And here are some of the names and characteristics of just a few of those Orisha. And in this faith, there are both priests and priestesses that connect specifically with one of the Orisha, and they embody that power, and they can serve as a medium between the Supreme Being and human beings. The Igbo people also believe in reincarnation. They are native to Nigeria, and there is proof that they've been there for at least 2,500 years. They have one main supreme God, and this is Chukwi. I might be saying that wrong. And there's also smaller divinities that you can pray to when you need and then ignore otherwise. And these are the Alusi. It has its own religion, and it's called the Odunani. But this religion is, again, interwoven into the Igbo culture and history, which is very ancient. The Nupi of West Africa also believe in a God, a supreme being that is over everything that exists, and they believe that that being is eternal. So when it comes to African religions, it is very difficult to define because it's not a monolith. There is not one organized African religion. There are hundreds of religions that are African religions in Africa, and they are interwoven with ethnicity, culture, history. They have their own languages and worldviews, so it's not easy to define. Typically, however, the religions that are native to Africa are animistic. Anim meaning soul or mind, personality stuff, and they attribute that soul, mind, spirit, personality stuff to things that are not human. Things like forests have spirits, things like mountains have spirits. The African religions typically involve masks, but what that means to each ethnic group is very different. They typically also involve divinations, but who is allowed to be a seer and talk to the supreme beings, that's unique amongst the different religions or cultures. So you can talk about these different religions, but you have to be very careful, as you saw, as I hopefully brought out the very rich diversity within the religious views in Africa.